Thank you, Mr. Rabel, and thank you all for your comments this morning. I appreciate that each of you has indicated a willingness to work with us on these issues as we advance them and recognize the significance of it. I'd like to ask, and I'll throw it out to the entire panel here. It's been mentioned, the strict liability standard that FLPMA imposes on owners and operators of power lines that are located on federal lands. And I've also mentioned the significant penalties for violating the state and federal or local requirements to clear the lines. I think it gets people's attention when you say it could be up to $1 million per day per violation. And then you have your consumers effectively paying twice, once under strict liability, and again for violating the ERO vegetation management standard. And this can come about even if the utility has been blocked from taking preventative steps due to oftentimes federal land management agency inaction. So the question to each of you is whether or not strict liability is the appropriate standard for those utilities that are performing the vegetation management work. And do you agree that that should be the case even where those damages, potential damages, might be preventable, where you might have a federal agency's inaction in allowing a utility to go on to the federal land to an existing right-of-way to perform the necessary work to remove, whether it's a dead and dying tree, but in other words, prevent that utility from clearing the line. So if we can speak to the standard that is out there right now under FLPMA, and whether you think that that's the appropriate standard, and whether that holds if the damages could have been preventable. And I'll start with you, Mr. Casamassa.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we are willing to and are ready to work with the committee on coming up with perhaps a more reasonable approach in certain situations for the liability, and a clearer definition of what that would mean both within and outside of the right-of-way. So I think that there's opportunities for us to look at that and then be able to make some modifications to it as well.
And let me ask you then whether you think it should be Congress or the federal agency, in this case BLM, determining the appropriate standard.
Well, I think that it's a combination of the two. I think that certainly there are roles for both to provide some frame for it as it relates to what we can do administratively, and then potentially to look at some adjustments being made through legislation.
Mr. Roos?
Chairman Murkowski, as my colleague from the Forest Service mentioned, we look forward to working with the committee on these kinds of issues. We strongly support these bills, and I believe that in regards to liability, there are opportunities for us to work together and find solutions.
Rest of the panel, Mr. Hayden.
Well, Chairman Murkowski, I absolutely agree that there should be liability relief for utilities if there are delays in the approval of a vegetation management plan. I also believe there should be liability relief if we are not allowed to work consistently with the plan, or if we are not allowed to cut hazard trees in accordance with the plan. But I would take that one step further. If we are acting in accordance with the plan, not negligent in any way, I would say that strict liability provisions may be, there should be consideration given to removing that strict liability from us if we are acting in accordance with the plan, because we can't be out there 24/7 determining when a new hazard tree crops up. And to your final question, I would just say that Congress should make that determination.
Appreciate that. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Senator. As a general rule, I think that strict liability is an appropriate standard for right-of-way holders on public lands, but in the context of utility electricity lines, I think it's important to recognize the public service that they provide, the important public service. And I don't think it's fair for Congress to impose standards that they must meet and then prevent them from meeting them and then impose strict liability for not meeting them. So In that case, I would just reiterate that I think the House bill's provisions are very troubling because they're overbroad, and the Senate bill takes a much more thoughtful approach to the strict liability issue.
Appreciate that. Mr. Rabel?
Yeah, so in agreement with Mr. Hayden and Mr. Miller, I would suggest that it would be a congressional decision with input from both federal agencies and utilities. And as long as the provisions are being met as far as the vegetation management plan and we're following our plan, then liability would indeed be considered and waived.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you each for that. Senator Cortez Masto. Thank you, Senator Barrasso. There's been a fair amount of discussion about the categorical exclusions. And to follow on that, this is directed to both you, Mr. Casamassa, and you, Mr. Ruse. From your perspective, are there some types of vegetation management activities that are routine enough, we just see enough of them, that they could be categorically excluded under NEPA? I guess that's the first part of the question. And if you can identify what those might be, why haven't the agencies acted to specifically exclude them previously?
Yeah, Madam Chair. Certainly, there are some, I'd say, vegetative community types that we think
What does
are.
that mean, vegetative
Well,
community?
it's just a classification of the type of trees or
Okay.
vegetation that are at a particular location. So, and so I think that there's opportunities to ensure that that is the kind of activity that could be clearing that vegetative community type could be an activity that should be provided to the utility companies, and certainly that's a part of it.
So if it should be and it could be, why haven't you?
And we have, up to this point, been working within the context of the categories that we have done administratively, and also looking at the full suite of CEs that are available to us through other pieces of legislation. But recognizing this is, I think, one of the areas that, given the large-scale insect outbreaks that have been occurring, particularly in the interior West, and the need for active management adjacent to or within the rights-of-way, there's an opportunity here to go beyond what we have presently administratively, or what has been provided through legislation in terms of categorical
So it
exclusion.
sounds like you're saying that you do have, you can clearly identify those types of activities that would be routine enough. You just need to do it. What about you, Mr. Ruse, within BLM?
Madam Chairwoman, I guess that I would say the same kind of holds for BLM. I think we've been focused primarily on developing vegetative management plans and working together along those lines and trying to streamline the processes that way. And we do have some tools in the toolbox, categorical exclusions, but I don't think they get specific enough for some of the areas that we have. So I think working together, we can find those things if we continue to work with industry as well as with the committee. I think we can refine what our needs are.
Well, let me ask the question, because there's been some discussion brought up primarily from Mr. Hayden and Mr. Rabel about inconsistent practices or procedures that lead to delays and planning difficulties. And I guess the question, it certainly seems to me that from the utilities side, they're saying that these delays are real. We don't think many of them are reasonable. How do you respond to that? You say you're trying to work with everybody, but do you think that more needs to be done to ensure not only streamlining, but a greater consistency to allow for better planning to thus reduce the delay.
Well, Madam Chair, I agree. I think that there has to be there has to be more consistency in our approach to the way that we manage the areas within and outside of the right-of-way. That certainly is something that we are working on. And I think it has to do not only with some of the clarity around some of the policy and procedures, but then also the recognition by the agency that, a stance around leadership when it comes to these kinds of issues is really important, that, we recognize the value of ensuring that we're stewarding all of the lands for all of the uses in and outside of these right-of-ways. We want to look for opportunities for us to work better across this landscape.
Well, let me ask on that, because you're saying all the right things. I don't think anyone would disagree with you, but I think what you hear is the frustration saying, well, the agency is saying the right thing, but yet we're not seeing that translate. We're still continuing to see the delay. We're still continuing to see conflict. And so is there anything going on administratively right now, or are you waiting for Congress to kind of sort things out and basically to tell you that to do the right thing?
Well, certainly we are taking action in some areas as it relates to some routine removal of vegetation inside the right-of-ways. And so that is, there is some active management actually going on right now across the landscape. Is it consistent across every single district office or forest in the agency? I would say no, and we're working towards that. But there is a considerable amount of work that's being done in cooperation with the utility companies.
Let me ask if Mr. Rabel and Mr. Hayden agree. Are you seeing a change in relationship, a willingness to work with our land manager, the local land managers working with the federal land managers, or it's still same old, same old?
It continues to be fairly inconsistent. So the short answer to your question is sometimes yes and sometimes no, and oftentimes that's dependent on change in staff. So you may have staffing levels that at certain times are in agreement with routine vegetation management and what your prescription is that's been long established on existing corridors, and then with turnover in staff, they may have a difference of opinion about your approach.
Mr. Hayden, would you agree?
I would completely agree, and I would lean back to the Benton Rural Electric example that just hit my desk a couple days ago that talks about their inconsistency. And I'd like to add that, one of the greatest strengths of working with the Forest Service for us is this decentralized decision-making. Local people that are in our communities, they understand our struggles, are making decisions. But one of the greatest weaknesses is that same decentralized decision-making, because they may have different interpretations of the rules. They may be afraid to make decisions at that local level. But we have this struggle where it's really great to be able to work locally with these people, and we struggle with that. So I would say that the inconsistency is still there.
Well, I think this is important for our agency folks, Mr. Casamasa and Mr. Ruse, to hear and understand that we've got a ways to go here to gain these efficiencies that we're all hoping for. Senator Cantwell.